Hello, everybody. This is Anne Lund, coming to you from the Haunted and Waiting podcast here on the Eye Opener Society. First of all, I always want to thank Gary for allowing me this opportunity to share my vision and my passion for the paranormal, specifically ghosts. So let's talk about this month's topic. And basically, that is tools of the trade and what ghost hunters really use, including myself. So let's start about talking about equipment. And one of the things I really want to start with is a story. This was a very interesting story that I had just kind of come across in my readings, and it was about the Fox sisters. And you'll understand as I tell you the story why this kind of relates to what I'm going to address today. Basically, there were three sisters, Maggie, Kate, and Leah, and they all lived in Hydesville, New York. And they are known for, here at least in this country, in America, for sparking the spiritual movement. And this was in about 1840s, I want to say 1848, when the two of the sisters, Maggie and Kate, claimed that they could communicate with a ghost through this rapping sounds in their home. And they claimed that this spirit identified himself as this murdered peddler that was buried in their basement wall. So when they reported this, the people in the town actually went into the house with their consent, obviously, and dug up their cellar. And importantly, they found bone fragments in a wooden box, believe it or not, in their house. The oldest sister, Leah, she then joined this kind of story situation, and they began conducting these seances regularly in their house and charging money for it. And it grew national attention and widespread belief in spirit communication. And that's basically what the gist of this podcast is about. Now, what it was they would sit around this table and they would ask these yes, no questions, and they would get a response of tapping for yes or no. Now, I don't know if it was like 2 taps for yes and 1 for no, but apparently this tapping went on and on. Sadly, though, in 1888, Maggie, one of the sisters, she confessed that she was actually doing this with her toe. She was able to crack her toe, and it made it sound like there was rapping under the table. And so this is just a situation, but it was debunked. It wasn't true. And then later on, they found out that this box of bones that was in the box was actually just a collection of different animal bones, like chicken bones, a cow bone, or what have you, that they put aside as being like this peddler. But this is how we're going to start with communicating with the dead and some of the tools and some kind of creepy stories that I came across as I explain every tool. Now, the most common and famous tool of all is obviously the Ouija board. Okay, so originally patented in 1891 by a gentleman named Elijah Bond. It was originally, believe it or not, just supposed to be a game. It had nothing to do with ghosts. Well, it did have to do with ghosts, but they never added any credence that if you buy this Ouija board, you'll be able to kind of communicate with, your Aunt Lizzie. That wasn't the case. It was really just a game just for fun. What had happened, though, is when The Exorcist came out in 1973, this is what kind of gave the Ouija board some credibility as being an actual form or tool to communicate with the dead. So if you remember in that movie, Regan, the girl that was possessed, her mother finds a Ouija board in the house and she asks Regan about it. And Regan, she just casually says, well, I've been playing with it by myself. And she mentions that she had been communicating with someone called Captain Howdy. Okay. So she says that he answers a lot of her questions. And then the mother kind of brushes it off like it's just sort of a game. Now, this is the danger with the Ouija board and why it matters. In this particular situation, this, if you believe in The Exorcist, this demon came masquerading as a friend, but actually became possessive of her body and possessed her body. And this is the fear that a lot of people have with the Ouija board. And how it's used, you just kind of place, it's a board, you place your fingers on this planchette, it's a triangle shaped piece, it spells out messages. So that was kind of the beauty of the Ouija board as opposed to like the tapping and the yes, no. You can actually get a whole message. You can get a name, you could get a date, you get, anything you really wanted to ask, it was able to tell you. But believe it or not, like I've used the Ouija board many times. Gary from Eye Opener Society, one of our earlier podcasts, if you look, it might have been the first one that I'm in. He talks about being in my house when he was a child in New York City as myself. And we had a bad situation with the Ouija board. But as myself, and I'll link that in my blog as well, that particular podcast if you want to listen to it. But as myself, I've used it in the past. I don't necessarily think it's bad. Um, I I think it becomes bad when you invite negative things, or you poke fun, or you criticize, or you chastise. I think then you can maybe attract something. But I think if you go to use the Ouija board in a respectful manner, and then you bless the surrounding, you'll be fine. That's my opinion. I don't know how you feel about it. I don't actually have a Ouija board in my house, just because I have family members that are afraid of them, but I've used them in the past and I've never had a situation with it. Um, but anyway, how can you debunk this? Obviously, if you have four people doing the Ouija, somebody can be moving the planchette. There really is no way of knowing if anybody is doing that. So that's how it's debunked. Let's talk about EVPs and spirit boxes, which for me, honestly, right now is the most common tool used by investigators today. You can get it on Amazon. You can get like a really good one on Amazon, but I'm going to be honest with you. I use my phone. The recording devices on the phone right now are so superior that you can basically use it with that. And what you do with when you do an EVP investigation, and again, it stands for electronic voice phenomenon. And what you do with that is you basically place the phone on a flat surface, nowhere near it. Don't go anywhere near it so you don't get any um, movement getting picked up, and you ask questions. So you basically can say, what is your name? Why are you here? Can I help you? And then what you do is you play it back. Now, I try to get everybody I know that's into ghost hunting to use this because to me, it is the best form of communication. What happens is you don't hear the answer in real time. So as you're doing the investigation, you don't hear it. But when you take the recording back, and I like to listen to it with a really good set of headset, real headset, real good one, um, you'll hear voices sometimes coming out. So, and why I feel this is really credible is that sometimes you'll you'll get words that make no sense, right? But sometimes when you get a really specific answer, like if I say how old you are, how old are you? And the response I get is 13. And then I know somebody had passed away and he was 13. I mean, that's pretty telling. It's annoying because you have to listen to it over, and a majority of what you're listening to it is nothing. So it gets really hard to listen to it, and the voices are very faint, so you have to really pay attention. It's just hard. But if you're really willing to do it, highly recommend. This is by far the best equipment that you can use. So let's get into the history of it because it's really fascinating. Believe it or not, Thomas Edison, um, he actually, some people think he's the one that kind of sparked interest in it because he really believed that spirits could influence electrical signals. So he started kind of a lot of this interest. And about the same time that he was interested in talking about it, some of the spiritualists began experimenting with early phonographic recordings, like tech to hear voices, and some were able to find them, but the quality was really bad. If you've ever listened to like an old record, you hear that skipping and that crackling sound. So it was really bad, but apparently they were able to find some evidence of ghost interaction. But in the mid-century, about the 1950s and 1960s, they really started taking it really seriously. This modern concept of the EVP really took shape at this time with a gentleman by the name of Frederick Jurgensen. He was a Swedish artist, painter, filmmaker as well. And in 1959, he went out with it was totally a fluke. He went out with his recorder and he was basically recording bird songs. I'm not sure why, maybe for his movies, but he was recording a bunch of bird songs. And when he played it back, he accidentally captured what he claims was his mother's voice with a couple of messages, but he swears it was his mother's voice calling him Frederick. So this led him to explore this phenomenon, and he had hours and hours of recordings where he was analyzing for just even the faintest voice recording. Now, his work inspired another guy by the name of Radov. He was a Latvian psychologist who became by far one of the most famous pioneers of EVP. By the way, guys, I will have all of the links on my blog packs, my blog casted in. Give me a few weeks, but I'll have that on my blog as well, hauntedandwaiting.blog. Hop on, though, if you want. I have other really important and fun information there, as well as some um, true stories, as well as my free novel. It's there as well. But getting back, this guy, Radov, he recorded several sessions. And what he did was he had this theory of using white noise or static. So besides just recording it, he would play back this static in the background while he was recording it because he felt that the spirits needed that as a medium to communicate. Like they used the energy from that white noise to get their message across. And that is really what is used today in the EVP recorders right now and the spirit boxes, which we'll talk about in a minute. That's what's used today. And so in 1971, he published the book, which is one of the best books for this particular theory, and it's called Breakthrough: An Amazing Experiment in Electronic Communication with the Dead. It's an actual book, was a bestseller. I will post the link in my blog as well. Now, if we wanted to debunk this, well, there's something called auditory pareidolia, and that's where your mind sometimes will create a voice when you want to hear it. So this happens to me a lot, and I was shocked to find out this was actually a thing. But when I hear a fan, sometimes I hear music in the background. We also have a wood burning stove that has this like fan behind it, and when it runs in the winter, sometimes I hear music in the background. So, and that is something called auditory pareidolia, where your mind will automatically it kind of tries to make sense of the noise and it'll put music or voices into the sound. It's not really there, but you're hearing it. So if you want to debunk the EVPs, that's what people will say it is. As well as it could be radio interference or just maybe an accidental recording of a nearby conversation. So this happened to me as well. I was recording. We have a haunted house literally on my cross the street from my house, and I was trying to do an EVP session there, and I came across with a conversation which I thought was coming from the house, which by the way was totally vacant. Turned out it was coming from my neighbor's house a few houses down. It picked up their conversation. So it was actually my son who was able to hear it and go, oh, that's so and so. And he was right. So this is how we debunk some of this stuff, which is interesting. So let's go down to dowsing rods. So if you've ever seen a dowsing rod, you can get them for like $15. I own a pair. They're these two sticks. They swivel in your hand. And apparently, when you're speaking to a ghost, you can ask a yes/no question. If they cross, I believe it's a yes. And if they stay straight, it's a no. So, but dowsing rods are not new. They were originally intended to use for water, and they were used in the 1500s when people would homestead or try to find where they could homestead. They would use these, and they would cross when you were standing over water, like underground water, and that's where you would build your house. This does work, apparently. I don't know how it works, but it does work. But spiritualists in the 1800s started using these to detect energy, specifically ley lines as well as spirits. If you don't know what a ley line is, go back to Eye Opener Society and look for Sunset Child's podcast where she talks about ley lines. I don't know much about them. I'm not really into ley lines, these like energy lines that run under certain parts of the world. I'll link her blog, her podcast to my blog as well. But other people were using them for ghosts, for talking to ghosts. And it's like I said, if they cross, you ask a yes/no question. If they cross, it's a yes. Are you here? And they cross. Is your name Tommy? They cross yes. And they'll go straight for no. So, are you mad? If they say straight, it's no. Very similar to the tapping situation I had mentioned earlier. So, these dowsing rods are used very commonly. For some reason, Gettysburg, they love to use them. And apparently, they've been used to identify exact spots where soldiers were later confirmed to have been buried, where they didn't know they were there, and they crossed and they dug, and lo and behold, they're there. There's not a lot of evidence for this kind of stuff. Um, there was one story that I was able to find where this Vermont woman had asked her grandfather, this is like an urban folklore, where he had hidden some money. And apparently, through all of these yes no questions, she was able to find a small box with a bunch of old coins that were found beneath some floorboards in her house. And she got all the information from this, from these dowsing rods. It's a funny podcast, or not podcast, I'm sorry, blog. It's called Chicken, Blood, and Steel. But I will link that if you want to read that again on my blog. Now let's talk about EMF meters. Okay, so very similar to what we've discussed before, but the EMF reader or meter detects heat or lack of. So the theory behind this is that ghosts tend to be colder, void of energy. They provide energy, but it tends to give you a cold spot, right? And that there's like an energy there. So the EMF meter was originally developed for electricians to identify electromagnetic fields or wiring, like when they were wiring in a house and they wanted to know where wires were. My husband's a contractor, and so we actually have a real good one. You can get these online, real cheap ones. They are actually really inexpensive. I would say if you're going to use an EMF reader, get a real one. Get one that an electrician would use. They're much better. They're much more detailed, and it's the one that I've used. Ghost hunters kind of caught on to this, and they started using them in the 1980s when they started noticing spikes in haunted houses and haunted rooms within haunted houses. So how it's used is basically you hold it up, and if there's a spirit present, the meter will spike to let you know there's like an electrical spike in the area. I did a ghost hunt in Gettysburg, and we were all handed one of these, and we were told not to place it on the floor and not to place it near a wall because of the wiring that ran through the floor, and the wall would cause it to spike. And of course, they told us not to do it. We all did it. What's the first thing you do when someone says, don't do it? You do it. And sure, and it was true. Whenever we went near a wall, it would spike, or we went near the floor in certain areas, it would spike. So we were told to just kind of hold it in front of us and walk into a room. And when we did that, we were in Gettysburg, but this was actually a ghost hunt that we did in a house where a murder had taken place in the 1980s. We weren't told anything else about it. We knew nothing about it until we got there. And we all were picking up a spike in the kitchen. And then later on, we had found out, among all the other evidence that we had collected that night, that there had been a woman murdered in her kitchen, I think by her husband or her lover, but one of those situations. And the meter would spike in the kitchen in a specific area. So that was interesting. So how this can be debunked? Well, again, a wire will set it off. Electrical wire in a wall will set it off, which is interesting because if you use one of these meters in the woods, like I have, they do spike. So it's just interesting. Like they do spike. I don't know how you would explain that. So let's talk about infrared thermometers or thermal cameras. Okay, another thing that's commonly used, originally developed for mechanics and for fire inspection. They would want to see where heat was. Basically, when you hold it up next to something, it'll give you an image and it'll show you where there's heat. Okay, so the paranormal group, we started to use these because of a drop in temperature. Okay, that ghosts tend to bring with them. If anybody's seen The Sixth Sense, one of my favorite movies, Cole's mother, Lynn, whenever there was a ghost present, you remember she would go to the thermostat and turn it up, or she would breathe in cold. You would see the mist from her mouth because it was so cold. But that's how they were used for those kinds of things, those kinds of places. So I'm going to post in my blog the Dixie House or the Dixie House Ghost. I'll put a link there and you can read up about it. But basically this happened recently, actually, in May in 2025, in St. Augustine, Florida. And there was this house that was reported to have been haunted for some time. A lot of people were seeing shadowy figures, hearing voices, and then feeling these cold spots. um, and specifically in this room that they ended up calling Jack's room. So when they looked into the research, the house had a lot of history. It had been there, again, it was in Florida, it was there during the Civil War. They weren't sure, though, if this Jack spirit was either like a Civil War figure or maybe a tenant, because I guess it was a boarding house in the 1900s. One of the tenants who had died under mysterious circumstances, perhaps in this room, because people had reported seeing him and smelling tobacco. And there was a rocking chair, of course, the rocking chair, which would rock back and forth, and they would hear a voice. So they went and they investigated specifically with this chair with a thermal camera, and they got a really beautiful image of the bottom half of a body. So obviously, this is a podcast; you can't see it. I will share their link on my blog so you can look at it yourself and then decide. But it's clearly the bottom half of a body. They swore no one had entered the room for over an hour. No one had been sitting in that chair. And the remainder of the room was like ice cold. So it was interesting that there was this residual heat pattern there. So how can you debunk this? Well, I don't know. I really don't know. Now, if you want a really cheap, way of communicating with the afterlife, there is the pendulum. Okay. Now, pendulums have been used for hundreds of years. In the Victorian seances, they came about. They were always there's always a pendulum there, kind of the same thing. They would go. I think it's back and forth for yes or a circle for no. No, I'm sorry. I think it's back and forth for no and a circle for yes. I don't really use pendulums a lot. A lot of times, people will use them to determine the sex of a baby in the same way. But you take it with what you want. I would say you can make one yourself with a string. I would say use a crystal, not just a rock, but you can get them online. I've gotten a couple at craft shows just because I thought they were really beautiful, paid like $4 for them. But that's something you could look into, a very inexpensive thing. Okay. How do you debunk it? Very easy. All I need to do is move my finger in the slightest way and I can get it to move back and forth or around in a circle. And believe it or not, you could be doing it and not even realizing you're doing it. So it could be something that's subconscious, not necessarily I'm trying to trick someone. Let's talk about cameras. So full spectrum camera is really what I would say to use, but photographers have been using cameras for hundreds of years, and every now and then something shows up. Now, in the 1800s, we have a whole bunch of them, these photos, which a lot of them were debunked. Which was easier to do at that time. Believe it or not, in the 1800s, if you wanted to fake a photo, it was a lot easier to do than during the digital age. It's harder to fake it in a digital age because people can tell it's been faked. But now that we're getting into AI, it's getting harder again. So, but today's ghost hunters will use these full spectrum cameras because they pick up more of the light that we can't see. And a lot of times these anomalies will pop up that way. So if you're going to do that, basically what you do is you snap a photo in an area that you know is haunted and then snap another one right after. And then you compare the two if an anomaly shows up in one. So it's interesting. This double exposure thing. If you've ever seen the Osbournes Want to Believe, Ozzy Osbourne and his son Jack will always fight. Jack will show him this great picture and Ozzy will say, it's a double exposure, he'll say. And it just gets Jack furious because you can't double expose on digital. So when these things show up in digital photos, it kind of makes you a little bit like stand back and wonder what exactly it is. So, they use them a lot, and then sometimes they show up accidentally. So if you go onto the internet, you'll see there's a bunch of these. They just kind of show up accidentally. The most telling ones, there's a ton from the Myrtles in Louisiana and obviously Gettysburg. There are hundreds of photos of these areas because they're known to be haunted. So I'm going to end my podcast here. Is there hard science to support any of these tools? No, unfortunately, there isn't. A lot of it is used for a ritual. A lot of it is used for validation. A lot of it is used just for fun or for the thrill. And a lot of it can be faked. So I want you to just bear that in mind. A lot of it can be faked either intentionally, a lot of times, you know, unintentionally. Like I said, like the slight movement of a hand, you're not realizing you're doing it. So, anyway, that's the end of my podcast. I hope you got some value of it. I will again be posting the blog with all of these links and resources if you want to hop on over. It's hauntedandwaiting.blog. You can also follow me on TikTok on Haunted and Waiting at Anne Lund. Obviously, here on Eye Opener Society, I strongly urge you to check all of the other podcasters that are here. We have Sunset Child. She's got such a strange and interesting way of looking at things, as well as Elaine's Oracles monthly readings, if you like tarot. And then you also have Gary and Lizzie right now are doing a lot of inspirational stuff and stuff on meditation. So, wellness, I would definitely look at their stuff. And anyway, so that's all I have for this month. And if you want to comment, please comment below or hop on over to my blog and comment there when other people can interact as well. I'm also on Facebook, by the way, small community there, but you can find me Haunted and Waiting on Facebook, very small community where you can interact with a lot of like-minded people. Thank you again and hope to see you next month.